In the 2021 Tokyo Olympic Games, the Russian Olympic Committee edged out Japan to win the men's gymnastics team title. With Russia being shut out of the Olympic movement and the Japanese men's team being the current world champions, they are firm favourites heading into the Paris 2024 Olympic Games this summer. Following the All Japan Championships and the NHK Trophy, the 5 men that will represent Team Japan have now been selected. In this episode, I chat all things Japanese gymnastics and Paris 2024 with Catherine Mills, the amazing lady behind Magnastics, and this is our story. Catherine, thank you very much for coming on.
Hi, thanks for having me.
I'm really excited about this. This is a first for us. We've not done a specific gymnastics episode where we've probably gone in very deep with a guest so far. We're going to get into the All Japan Championships, the NHK Trophy, and then talk about, potentially both of our predictions for the Olympic Games in Paris this summer. But before we do that, Catherine, just tell me a little bit about Magnastics, the inspiration for you starting that initially, and I guess where your passion for gymnastics came from.
Gosh, when did I start? I think it was about 2018. So
Okay.
I was still at university and I just found I had a lot of opinions and I wanted to write about it. And also men's gymnastics, as we know, is not as popular as women's gymnastics.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of people talking about women's gymnastics. And I thought if I do something like this, I can maybe help spread some knowledge, help get more people interested. I've been watching gymnastics mainly since 2012 when the Olympics were in London.
Okay.
And it was Uchimura who kind of got me hooked, which
Right.
is, I think, why Japan's always been my favorite team. But yeah, I mean, my mum was a gymnastics coach.
Okay, wow.
She is a gymnastics coach. She was a gymnast. And that's kind of where my love of the sport came from. But after watching the Olympics in 2012, it all just kind of snowballed, and now I'm it's all I think about, basically.
And why in particular was it men's gymnastics, not women's gymnastics, Catherine?
I think it was Kohei.
Okay, right.
I think I don't know why, because I did women's gymnastics.
Yeah.
I still do it. Me and my mum do adult gymnastics. I was coaching women's gymnastics. I've started coaching men's recently, actually.
Right, okay, cool. Where is it that you're based, Catherine? Where are you based?
I'm in Kent, southeast coast.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Amazing. What was it? Can you remember the first competition you went to watch live?
That was, I think it was 2015 Worlds.
Okay.
I think.
Yeah, in Glasgow.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was a great competition to watch as well, right? Yeah, obviously
it was
the
the
British
only time I
men.
ever got to see Kohei, so really glad I went.
What was it like watching him live? Obviously, you see him on TV and you watched him in 2012, and then seeing him live, I think I was always taken back with just how small and such a light frame he has. I think he competed around 52 kilos, which just blows my mind.
Yeah, it's just incredible. It was almost because I was still quite young at the time.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost I can't look the same as it does on TV.
Yeah.
But then you get there and it's that's just what they're doing. It looks the same. Obviously there's the atmosphere and everything. But yeah, and he's just perfect. So
Was there any big differences that you noticed, from watching gymnastics for the first time, really at men's gymnastics on TV and then seeing it live? Was there anything that struck you? Were you taken back by the power of it? Sometimes on TV that maybe gets lost a little bit.
I don't think so, because I'd watched a lot of it at that point,
Okay.
and I'd been going back and watching old competitions. So I was really into it at that point, and I was just excited to see everyone.
Yeah.
I think, and I was just so caught up in getting to see all my favorite athletes and the excitement of it all. I think
It's amazing, right, that now we're in 2024 now, right? But when I was a kid, if you were a bit of a gymnastics geek, there was nowhere to go. There was nothing. It was me scouring the internet, looking for VHS tapes of old competitions, watching them on an old VHS player. There was nowhere. YouTube just came around in the early days, but it wasn't like today when every single competition, every routine is put up on YouTube. There were very few and far between. I remember the first competition I watched on YouTube was the Athens 2004 men's team final. And because you could only upload a certain size file onto YouTube at that time, it was uploaded in like 4-minute sections. So I watched a 3-hour competition in like 4-minute blocks. So you'd get like one
Yeah.
or two routines in those 4 minutes. Whereas now it's just, you know, if you're passionate about anything in any niche topic, it doesn't have to be men's gymnastics. There's so much out there for you to go to. But I guess you really are quite a big fish in a very small pond when it comes to men's gymnastics. Why do you think that is, Catherine? Like, when you look at the women's scene, particularly on Twitter, right? There's a massive women's gymnastics following and fan base, especially on Twitter. Why do you think on the men's side it is just that small? And, you know, as somebody that's not been a male gymnast, you'll have your own opinions on this, and this will be quite interesting. Why can't men's gymnastics just capture that? This in the same way that the women's program does. You know, that's something I talk about a lot with athletes that come on here, and we struggle to figure it out. What is it? There's something missing, because when you see it live, right, for the first time, like, this is incredible. Why is this not one of the biggest sports in the world?
Yeah, I think a large part of it is to do with, like, obviously on Twitter you've got like English speaking people. So like in Japan, men's gymnastics is more popular. But like, and like in the US, the women have had so much more success that kind of puts them at the forefront. Like, that's what people want to talk about.
Yeah.
And I think with the US men having such a good world championships last year, I did notice a lot more people were talking about them.
Okay, right. That's
so that
interesting.
was really cool. I think it's kind of hard to say, really. I think a lot of people feel like women's gymnastics is easier to understand. Like, so many people I talked to were just like, how do you even understand what's going on pommel horse? Like,
right, okay.
It all looks the same.
Yeah.
I'm like, no, it's different skills.
Yeah.
But they just can't wrap their heads around it. One thing I find is a lot of people think like rings, they say it's boring because it's quite like a static event compared to like floor or vault or high bar.
Yeah.
Which is really interesting, because when you talk to like guys who are maybe like coming to an adult gymnastics class, or like people I know at uni, the guys come in the gym and they want to do the rings. They want to do a backflip and they want to do rings.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess it's also just kind of like because gymnastics is seen as like a girly thing, and like especially in kind of like the Western world, people think of gymnastics, they think of the women. So like, oh, men doing gymnastics, that's kind of like, I don't get it.
Yeah.
And there's kind of like these stereotypes, and I think that kind of holds people back from, like, I don't know, really wanting to get interested in it.
I think one thing that I've just thought of from chatting to you then as well is that I've never really thought about is that I think as a fan base, it would be easier for you to go from men's gymnastics to women's, because you could understand the skills relatively easily. But for a women's gymnastics fan that doesn't know anything about men's to then try and understand rings and pommel horse, that would be quite confusing. Whereas on the beam, I can understand a flick or a walkover or a side somersault. I can understand that because I can see it. But for a women's fan that specifically followed that sport to then understand what a shear to handstand is or a woo travel, that's just it's so confusing. I don't want to start learning that. So that maybe that is something as well. I don't think we have transferable fan bases too much. I don't think you have a lot of people that are really into men's gymnastics they're not really into women's, and whoever's into women's is not necessarily into men's. So that's potentially something. But yeah, it's something that I hope that can be fixed in the future. I don't know how you do that, but like you said, it's very interesting. If you're at an adults gymnastics class, or if you're in a fitness gym, people want to do calisthenics and lift their own body weight, and they want to do rings, but the sport hasn't been able to capture those people yet. You know, we've chatted to a few people that are now getting into sports like high rocks, right? Or they're doing CrossFit. Well, there's a lot of gymnastics elements to these sports, but gymnastics still hasn't been able to kind of grab that audience. And I think if there's a way that somebody can figure out doing that, it's going to certainly catapult the sport into the mainstream a little bit more. But yeah, no, it's really fascinating being able to chat to somebody with your your expertise, I guess, in the area that we're going to look at today, but also just somebody that comes from a different background. It's from the women's side of the sport. Obviously, you said your mum's a gymnastics coach, but you take a real interest in men's gymnastics. I think that's really cool. It's quite unique as well. Let's get on to the Japanese gymnastics then. Firstly, just tell us about your trip to Japan. You went out there to watch the All Japan Championships. I was fortunate enough in 2015, at the end of that year, to go on a training camp to Japan and get to watch their championships that take place in November. For me, it was an incredible experience. I was blown away by the depth of the gymnastics. One thing that really stuck out for me was just the amount of athletes that had brothers and sisters competing. It was like a family trade, you know, in the same way that you would, for example, let's say in my family, were footballers or builders, you would go into the family trade. It was the same with gymnastics, and they had generations of gymnasts within their family. That really I was blown away by that, and I thought, okay, this is why they're the best in the world, because that knowledge just gets passed down continuously. Tell me a little bit about the trip, and also your initial thoughts on the culture of gymnastics as you experienced it in Japan.
Yeah, so I've always wanted to go and watch like Japanese national competitions. And yeah, it was just kind of in the back of my mind for a while, like it'd be really cool to go in the Olympic year, like when everyone's kind of at the top of their game, like going into Olympic selection. And the timing just kind of worked out well for me. I was able to go this year. I decided to go to All Japan rather than NHK because I thought some people might not qualify to NHK and I wanted to see as many people as possible.
Yeah.
The first day is free entry. Anyone can literally just show up at the arena and walk in, which I think is really cool and a good way to promote the sport as well. One thing I found really interesting about like gymnastics crowds in Japan is a lot of them are maybe not the demographic you would expect for like men's gymnastics competitions.
Okay.
There's a lot of women there watching.
Right.
And I think a lot of them get into becoming fans of it because their sons take it up.
Right.
Because I know like a friend of mine I met up with in Japan, I'm pretty sure she got interested in it because her son was doing it.
Right.
I actually met her at the World Championships in Antwerp. She went all the way there because she's such a big fan of the sport.
Oh, wow.
Like, her son didn't come. It was her and a friend.
No way.
Yeah, and like she introduced me to someone else whose son was competing. So yeah, it was really cool. Like you say, the family involvement, it doesn't just stretch to like the people doing the gymnastics. I think it kind of gets everyone interested as well.
What were the crowds like, Catherine? Because you know, we hear that in Japan, gymnastics is one of the national sports, and I remember being there in Tokyo for the World Championships in 2011, and on the trains, every like they almost had they were in the shape of rings that you would hold on the train so you didn't fall over, and they all had Uchimura's face on them, every single one on every train.
Wow.
But was it a packed out arena? Because you often see Japanese competitions where it's not actually a packed out arena, and you think, well, it's a national sport. Why is it not full? Why is there not 10,000 people watching?
Yeah. So the qualifying days were Thursday and Friday. So obviously, being weekdays, they weren't that busy. Especially in kind of like they have the different groups. So the first group is kind of lesser known, kind of the lower level gymnasts. And then the later group was definitely busier. And then on the finals, it was pretty full.
Okay. And was it in Tokyo?
No, it was in Takasaki, it was I think about an hour or maybe just over an hour on the bullet train away.
Okay.
So I know people. I went and just stayed there for the weekend, so that I went to all 4 days. But I know people who are coming like just for a day or just for 2 days would like come and go from Tokyo that day.
Yeah.
So it was like accessible from Tokyo, especially with the bullet trains being so fast.
Amazing. And did the competition run, Catherine, in a typical way that a competition would run in Europe? You know, and what I mean by that is kind of like the time schedule. Was it just a very classic hour warm up, 2.5 hour to 3 hour competition? Runs very smoothly. Did they do anything different, or was it just that very almost stereotypical like long competition format?
Yeah, it was pretty much what you'd expect.
Right.
Like
Okay.
they have the warm up, they compete, the break between groups in the qualifying round, and then next group comes out, warms up, they compete. Yeah.
And did they compete in their teams and their university teams, or were they mixed up as individuals?
No, I don't know how they do this. If it's just like a random thing or there's like a system, I don't know. But they're mixed up.
Okay.
So all people who are on the same, like from the same club or from the same university, won't necessarily be together.
Right. Okay.
So like some of them get split up across the qualifying groups. So like some might be in some Division One and then some in the second group.
Okay. And that might
But
be
then within
random.
groups again, they're mixed up. Yeah.
And do you think that's random or seeded or?
I honestly have no idea.
Okay.
Because
Right.
like, so I think it was like the guys from Central Sports, there were like 3 of them in one group and then like one in another group and one in a different group. So they were kind of all over the place.
Yeah, but I guess they have
I
so
don't know
many
how it
coaches,
works.
right? That the coaches weren't necessarily running around the arena. They just had a different coach with a different set of athletes.
Yeah, I wasn't really paying attention to what the coaches were doing, to be honest.
In
But,
terms of in
yeah.
terms of the coaches, Catherine, did you notice? Because for me, I'm always struck, and like my knowledge of past Japanese gymnastics is pretty good. I'm always taken back by the ex-athletes that are working for each team, and it like that for me, it's one of my biggest criticisms of the system we have in place here in Great Britain is that no one gets back into the sport. I think gymnastics coaching in Japan is a very well-respected profession, and I think they get paid very well, and they get paid very well by the universities. So you often see previous Olympic champions coaching the next generation, and that just continues. Like, it's very, very common. In fact, it's almost rarer that if you are a former athlete that compete at a high level, that you don't go into gymnastics coaching.
Yeah.
Was that something that you noticed being there?
Yeah. I mean, I was kind of just like always on the lookout for Kenzo because I knew he was going to be there coaching.
Okay.
Yeah, and like you get it, I think, in all the teams. Like Kenzo's coaching for his university team. Like all the central coaches seem to be previous athletes.
Yeah.
You've got guys who are so like Yunakura, who won a vault medal in 2021 at Worlds. He's now coaching at his club, and he was competing as recently as last year. And I don't know if it's like I don't know if he's retired or if he's just taking some time out and coaching while he's recovering. I'm not sure, but he was there like coaching guys who ended up making the team. So
which is amazing,
really
right?
cool,
Because that knowledge is fresh in his brain. So he's not losing it, and he's giving that back. I wonder what their system is in terms of their coaching qualifications and how that works. You know, I always think it's quite in Great Britain. I think the way they do, and this is completely different to gymnastics, but because we train at Lilleshall, the men's FA in terms of the men's football association, when a player would retire that was a very high-level player, they would straight away do their coaching qualifications at Lilleshall, and you'd see them in the summer. So players that had played at the best teams, so Man United, Manchester City, Chelsea, Arsenal, as soon as they'd retired, they'd be doing their A licence, so be fully qualified straight away. And I'm not sure whether that was done through the clubs, through them personally, or through the FA. The FA encouraged it. I think that's something that, we could do a better job of here in Great Britain, and British gymnastics should be trying to really actively encourage those athletes that are coming towards their end of their career or have just finished. Look, we'll pay for your coaching qualifications because we're going to get so much back from you if you're fully qualified. I think that's something we should do better, and they do really well over there in Japan. I noticed Isayo Yoneda was coaching one of the teams. Takahiro Kashima is in the commentary box. It's all these. Sukahara, I think, was doing some commentary. It's all that knowledge is just staying within the sport. I think it's an amazing thing, and I think it's no wonder why they just remain one of the best teams in the world. Can we look at, Catherine? Can you explain for the people listening what is the qualification process for a Japanese Olympics team? Is it the same as it's been previously, and what was it this time around?
So it's always pretty much similar. This year was a bit different. Usually, like the last couple of World Championships, it's been the same. It was slightly different this year just because they normally don't have 2 days of the NHK Cup. So what it was, so the first spot, Daiki earned that spot at World Championships by becoming the world all-around champion. And that's been in their policies for at least a decade. Like
Okay.
as long as I've been following the sport, it's always been if you win the all around the World Championships, you automatically make the next year's team. So that was like how Kohei made the Rio team, for example. And that was how Daiki made the world's team last year. So that's always been in place. So he was like solidly on the team. And then after that, after 2 days of All Japan Championships, 2 days of NHK, the top 2 all-arounders, aside from Daiki, are automatically on the team.
Okay. So
And then
effectively, you've
after
got the
that-
top 3 all-arounders.
Yeah, essentially. What actually ended up happening was Daiki withdrew from NHK, so it was literally the top 2.
Okay.
But usually it does end up being the top 3. And then the 4th spot has to be someone who's top 10 all around. And it's the combination is like how much can they contribute to the 3 athletes we've already got, and it's one of them has to be top 10 all around, and then the 5th member is again just how much can they contribute, and they don't necessarily have to be an all around gymnast.
Okay.
So that's how you see someone like Minami Kazuki last year on the World Championships team. He doesn't do all around; he only does 2 events, but his scores on those 2 events were so high that he made it anyway.
Okay.
But it is so difficult to make a Japanese team in that way, because
they have so many specialists.
One missed routine and that's it. Which is what happened to Kazuki this year, actually.
So if you're going for that 5th spot, which is effectively will be a specialist spot, right? You have to hit that routine that you're specializing on, or 2 apparatus, or potentially 3. You have to hit them at every competition to take that spot, essentially.
Well, so the way it's calculated, the contribution is its best 3 out of 4 scores, because it's 4 days of competition, and they take the highest 3 and average them.
So you could have 1 miss and then...
Yeah.
Okay.
But the problem is that if you miss on the first day, you don't qualify for any of the other days.
Right, wow. So the first day is almost, in a way, the most important day.
Yeah. So the way it works is at All Japan Championships, you have like all these gymnasts. You've got like 70 odd guys doing all around, and then you've got the guys who are specialists. And it's top 30 all around qualify for the final, and also top 6 on each event.
Excluding the all-arounders?
Yeah. So guys who didn't qualify for the all-around final, top 6 on each event, get to do that event the next day and qualify for the first day of NHK. Wow.
So if you qualified, Catherine, as just a specialist in a top 6 on an apparatus from that first day at All Japan, and you qualified for the NHK first day, can you do all around on that first day at NHK, or can you only do that apparatus?
No, you can only do the event you were top 6 on.
Okay, cool. So the 30 all-arounders that qualified for that second day, they're the only all-arounders that can do the NHK.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. That's very useful, because you know, if you're a gymnastics fan and you do an amazing job on Twitter of sharing all the competition results that come in and translate the names, but it's very confusing to know how does this. It just looks like a bit of a minefield if you don't speak Japanese. So it's very helpful that you can have an explanation from yourself. I know friends of mine and gymnastics fans will find this really helpful to understand that process a little bit.
Yeah, so there are like examples from this year. We actually had 3 like top gymnasts, 2 who were on the world's team last year, and another one who was on the world's team the year before. None of them came top 30 on the first day. So that was Chiba Kenta, Sugimoto Kaito, and Tanagawa Kakeru, all like amazing top gymnasts, world medalists. Didn't qualify for the all-around final because they just had not even a terrible day, just like a couple of falls.
Yeah.
But all of them were top 6 on, so all 3 of those guys were top 6 on at least one event.
Okay.
So they got to compete in the final, but only on 1 or 2 events.
Yeah.
And they got to compete at NHK, but only on 1 or 2 events.
Yeah. And so effectively, because those guys are essentially all-arounders, their Olympic selection was kind of done after that first day. Do you feel, as a fan, do you feel like that is the best way to go in terms, you're ultimately gonna, it's almost like survival of the fittest, right? Like if you can make it through that Japanese selection process, because I often say to people, actually once you're at the games, it's actually in many ways it's a lot easier. It's getting through the selection process, which is the hard bit. Once you do that, you kind of, the pressure's off your back a little bit because you made it already. But getting through that Japanese selection process is just, it's incredible. You know, it's so ruthless, and they really do stick to numbers, right? They don't change their mind or go back and forth. Like, it's not, you know, obviously Daiki, you know, was able to pull out of the NHK. I'm going to ask you about why he did withdraw from that. But other than that, like, this is the way it is, and you have to stick to it no matter what. And I guess they can do that because of the depth, right? Whereas in Great Britain, we almost need that kind of little bit of leeway because, you know, at times we might only have 7 or 8 gymnasts that realistically could compete at a high level.
Yeah, I mean, it is tough because, like, obviously, like, you can have a little bit of a rough day. But as I say, when they actually calculate the team scores, it's best 3 out of 4 scores. So there is a possibility that if they were able to compete, they would have great days, the rest of them.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, with such a deep field, the cutoff does have to be somewhere.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it's hard to watch when you're a fan of these guys.
Yeah.
Especially when they're still getting scores that would, like, qualify to a world all-around final.
Yeah.
But
and
yeah,
just talk a little bit about
brutal.
that depth then, Catherine. You've obviously watched that, being there for that first competition, the All Japan Championships. Just for people listening, you know, how many gymnasts were scoring 80 plus? Because that's become, because the scores have come down in terms of the way in which scores have been structured in gymnastics over the past decade, and the scores are coming down every cycle. Although you now have guys that are still getting close, relatively close to 90. That 80 has become a real kind of like benchmark. How many gymnasts scored over 80 at that competition?
I believe it was 45.
45 gymnasts. And do you know off the top of your head how many gymnasts scored over 80 at, let's say, the British Championships or then the European Championships? Or a ballpark figure?
Championships, it was 3.
So 3. So we've got 3 gymnasts scoring over 80 at the British Championships and 45 in Japan, which is just, it's incredible, isn't it? Like that depth. Like I don't know how. I remember being there in Japan in 2015 and thinking, how do we compete with this? Like I don't understand how you compete with this. Not only that, the resources they were throwing at gymnastics, like the money was just endless. Like I had the opportunity to train at the National Centre, and I was just saying, I just couldn't believe it. I was gobsmacked with like I said, the amount of resources that get sent there. What was it like seeing that depth firsthand live?
I've never seen anything like it. It's crazy because you'll be sitting there and you've only got one set of eyes, and it's like you've got an Olympic champion going on the parallel bars, and you've got a world champion going on the floor, and you've got a world medalist over there, and it's like, how am I supposed to watch like 5 different world medalist athletes competing all at the same time?
Yeah.
It's like you don't know where to look. I actually was quite annoyed because I ended up missing some routines I really wanted to see.
Right, okay, yeah.
Because there's just too much going on.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Let's focus then. I'm going to go through the athletes that have made the team, Catherine, and then after that we'll chat about probably some of the standout performances outside of those guys. But because we have a team that's been selected, which is pretty cool, right? It's quite early on. It's one of the first teams to be officially selected, would you say?
Yeah. I think it is the first one that's been officially selected. The weird thing about Japan is, like, no matter whether it's an Olympic year or a World Championships year, they always select the team around the same time.
Okay.
A lot of people think in World Championships years that they select it too early. But obviously, at this point, the Olympics is about 2 months away.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, well, let's start with Daiki Hashimoto then. Obviously, the current world champion and Olympic champion. Just tell me about his competition at the All Japan. You got to witness it yourself. Tell me about some of his routines. Were there any changes in terms of skills from the World Championships to now? And what were just your impressions on his performance?
Yeah, so he's upgraded his floor routine by 0.2. So now he's got a 6.2. I don't think his difficulty score has changed on rings, but he's replaced one of the skills. So last year he was doing an inverted cross, and in my opinion, it wasn't very well executed.
Okay.
So it was like costing him more than it was gaining him in difficulty.
Yeah.
He's replaced that now with the same skill but ending in a Maltese.
Okay. So was he
So
doing
in my
backup
opinion,
rise to inverted cross, and he switched it to a back rise to Maltese, or
I think so. Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Um, so same difficulty score, I think, but it's cleaner in my opinion.
yeah.
I think that was a really smart decision.
Did that translate in his
Um,
scores that he was getting if you compared him to the Worlds to then this competition?
yeah, it was maybe like 1 or 2 tenths higher, I
Okay.
think. But rings judging at Worlds was really strict.
Yeah, yeah,
I think. Um, I mean, domestic scores obviously are always a little bit looser, but I do think Japan probably has some of the most accurate domestic scoring. Um, I don't think there were that many changes elsewhere, but he looked really good.
okay,
Like the quality, he was struggling a little bit on parallel bars,
okay,
and he's been talking about wanting to upgrade. So he wants to do a 6.3, which I think he has done before,
right,
but that was like his shakiest event, like both days of the competition. Um, yeah, on the second day, he was getting like, aside from rings, like 15 on floor, 15 on pommel horse, 15 on vault. And it was like, oh, he only needs to average like kind of 14.7 or something like that across P bars and high bar
yeah,
to break 89, which he's never done before. Which thought like, just do his normal routines and he'll get it. Had a bit of a struggle on parallel bars. He said his arms cramped up.
okay,
So he ended up downgrading his high bar routine, left out the Lucan, and had a bit of a struggle on a dismount. So he ended up just below 88.
yeah.
But if he'd done a normal high bar routine for him, he would have got 89, which is a big deal,
Yeah,
obviously.
it's a huge
That's
score. Yeah, it's a
like,
massive score. Yeah, I often think that in his high bar routine, the only weakness is that dismount action. He comes out so early at the back, and he sometimes kicks it a little early. So when he did that action, I was waiting for his low landing on that dismount. But I didn't. I don't know whether I saw his parallel bars routine, but that's actually quite a common thing on parallel bars. You often see, every now and then, you will see a gymnast that cramps up in their calves from pointing their toes and their legs
yeah,
too hard, and they have to kind of like shake their legs out. So it's interesting that he cramped up. I don't know whether that was in his arms or his legs,
yeah, it was his
but
arms.
it was his arms. But yeah, I mean, an incredible performance, and it's not a surprise. I mean, when you're doing that level of gymnastics 2 days back to back, it's incredible. And I think what you end up with is, whatever team is selected, they're incredibly consistent because they've got to compete back to back. And I used to hate doing the British Championships and then the Masters finals the next day, because we'd sometimes finish that British Championships at like 10 o'clock at night, and then at 8 in the morning we'd have to be in the arena ready to warm up.
Yeah.
So I think, yeah, it's amazing that he was able to almost average, I think he averaged 88 pretty much over those 2 days, which is an incredible score, and he's easily the front runner going into Paris. What was the decision then what did you hear about the decision to pull out of the AHK?
So in the like official training the day before, he injured his finger on parallel bars.
Okay.
So I think, like, from what I can tell, I mean, I don't speak Japanese, so I'm just relying on kind of machine translations, but it sounds like he sprained it.
Okay.
And you could see, because he was there watching, he had it like taped up.
Right. Okay.
But it's not broken or anything, which is
Yeah.
good. And I think it kind of sounds like it's the kind of thing where, like, if he didn't have that spot confirmed, he would have competed anyway.
So it's just precautionary.
Yeah.
Yeah, just a smart decision. There's no point risking it at this point.
I think, like, he didn't want to pull out,
Okay.
but
The
like the
decision was
national
made.
team staff were like, you probably should just rest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How would you compare him? Obviously, you've been to watch Uchimura compete live. That 2012 Olympic Games was the first time you were really inspired. How would you compare the two, Catherine? How would you compare Hashimoto's gymnastics to Uchimura's? Look, if he goes to this Olympic Games, he becomes back-to-back Olympic champion. He's still very young, right? So LA 2028, he's got an opportunity to make it free. How would you compare the two in terms of their gymnastics? You've seen them both live compete. And what would you say there? It was a topic that I touched on recently in an episode. And, when I looked at both of their gymnastics, I felt that actually on Uchimura's strengths, I felt he was better than Hashimoto. But on Uchimura's weaknesses, I felt Hashimoto was better, if that makes sense. How would you compare the both?
So for me, I mean, no one compares to Kohei. I think Daiki is obviously amazing, but he's got kind of definite areas that aren't as strong, like his rings. I kind of like listening to the last podcast. I disagree a little bit. I think Kohei was better at rings.
Right. Okay.
World finalist came, I believe, 6th in a world final.
Yeah.
Whereas Daiki would never make a world final.
Yeah. That is interesting. I think for me though, I just feel like I think maybe it was to do with Uchimura's shoulders. But particularly at the end of his career, if you watch a lot of his rings routines, he comes in super high into his backup rise Maltese, and he's massively shifted in terms of his wrist position. But it's a sign of the times. You were able to do that at that point. For me, I feel that his rings routine is a little more consistent, but that's why gymnastics is great, right? Because it's subjective and you can have a personal preference. What do you think in terms of the other apparatus then? When you listened to me in that podcast, what did you think in terms of the other areas?
It's interesting because like they get compared a lot, and Daiki has actually spoken about like he really doesn't like it when people kind of call him like the next Kohei or like compare them constantly because he just wants to be his own person.
Yeah.
And also like because Kohei kind of towards the end of his career, high bar was kind of his main event, and Daiki's main event is kind of high bar as well. So people compare them a lot, and say like they're similar gymnasts, but I don't think they're similar gymnasts at all. Obviously they have some similarities, but not to the extent that some people kind of make out.
Yeah.
I think Daiki definitely stronger on pommel horse. For me, Kohei like floor and high bar. And parallel bars, they were like his events.
Yeah.
Vault is probably about the same. Kohei had a little bit more difficulty when he was doing the Li Xiaopeng vault.
Yeah.
Daiki maybe a bit more kind of solid.
Yeah. I would say that vault for Uchimura was almost like there were times where you felt like, I don't think you've done this a lot in training.
Well, he said in an interview once that every time he was about to do it, he felt like he was going to die.
Yeah. Well, it does not surprise me because it looked like that. I almost would wince because I'd be waiting, especially watching his ankles. It's technically that vault is just an incredible vault. And it's like an equal mix of, for me personally, when you do Yurchenko vaults, it's way more about technique than it is power. But I think for that vault, for him to get the 2.5 round, it was almost an equal mix of technique plus I need a bit of power just to get it round. So yeah, it's interesting. The way I would compare them on vault is the same way. I would say that when I watch Daiki on vault, I'm just very calm, like he's going to be fine doing that triple twist. Whereas Uchimura, it was just a bit of and that was probably highlighted when he hurt his ankle doing that vault at the World Championships towards the end of his career. But yeah, I would agree, like on floor, parallel bars and high bar. Although I do, Daiki's high bar for me is such a well-rounded routine. And I think because of the code, Uchimura could have quite easily done the routine that Daiki is. That would probably be the difference, I think. Maybe Uchimura could have done all of the gymnastics Daiki was doing if he needed to, but whether it could be the other way around, I'm not quite sure. But it's natural. I'm sure he doesn't like being compared, but every athlete would say that. But as sports fans, you're just going to do it when their careers are so similar and the results are so similar. The first thing you're going to do is compare the two. But yeah, okay, amazing. It's great to have spoken about him. He obviously is the best in the world right now. It's going to be amazing to see him compete at the Olympic Games. Let's move on to the next athlete. Oka Shinosuke. Tell me about his performance at All Japan. He obviously had some mistakes and some falls at that competition. What were your initial takeaways from watching him compete?
So I've been thinking since he won the Asian Championships all around last year, I've been thinking like he's a prime contender for this team. Because last year he didn't make either of the big teams because he was just coming back from a ACL injury, like major injury, had some struggles on the first day. I think he fell like 4 times, still made the final. So yeah, that's why he couldn't like push onto the big teams last year. But like from the competitions that happened later in the year, I was like, as long as he is consistent, he's going to be there because he used that time when he was injured to get stronger on rings. Because he knows that's a weak event for Japan.
Yeah.
And just he's so well-rounded. Like he doesn't really have a weak event. I mean, he was struggling on pommel horse, but when he hits it, he's going like mid to high 14s. Like his lowest scoring event when he hits his vault, which is really unusual. And his form is just beautiful. Like he's got some of the best like leg form in the sport, I think, at the moment. Yeah, a little bit inconsistent, had some problems, but he still, like, he had both days All Japan, he had a fall and he had another routine that was kind of not great, and he still broke 86.
Yeah.
So for me, he's quite clearly the second best gymnast in Japan after Daiki. And then I know in the run-up to NHK, he was having some problems with his back.
Right.
Like lower back pain. And you could kind of see it after some routines. He was a bit uncomfortable, which also might have contributed to like why on that second day especially he didn't kind of do his best.
Right.
But I think like the quality of his gymnastics is outstanding. Yeah.
Can you pick out some of your favourite elements that he performs? I know for me personally, watching his routines, what's been really hard is that there's been a bit of a window between me retiring and then following gymnastics. And I'm slowly, through the podcast, starting to follow it a little bit more. So I haven't watched a ton of his gymnastics, but I think the element that stuck out for me straight away was his back in full out straight on floor, which is my favourite floor skill. So straight away I was like, wow, that's beautiful. I found it a little odd that he finishes on a 2.5 backwards, because it's quite a weak dismount. So I found that a little bit strange.
I think that's because of his knee injury.
Right, okay.
He's still not got back.
Right.
So like he used to have a handspring 2.5 on vault as well. At the moment he only does the CAS 1.5.
Right.
So I think the 2.5 dismount on floor is the same kind of thing. Like he doesn't need to push it when he's already had that knee injury.
Yeah.
Like just kind of play it a bit safe.
So potentially he could be someone that challenges Daiki in the next 2 years. If you look at if he can get his floor and vault back to where they were, increase his difficulty, and he becomes a bit more consistent because he's still having those mistakes. He could be someone that's pushing 87, 88 and then starts to push Daiki, which would be great.
Yeah. So, I mean, he's still only 20 years old. And yeah, I mean, his vault when he was doing it wasn't that great anyway, and his vault is not that strong at the moment. Okay. So I'm not sure if he'll necessarily be able to get that back. Okay. If you add up like his highest scores on each event from these competitions, it's something like it's around 87.8.
Wow. So very high.
So he's at the level, I think, where, in my opinion, he's the front runner for all-around bronze.
Yeah, I read that you said that because I read your write-up, which was great, after the All Japan Championships. Who are you then, in your mind, factoring in as second?
Zhang Baheng.
Okay. Yeah.
So he's kind of gone under the radar a bit because he didn't get sent to World Championships last year. In my opinion, he is the best gymnast in the world.
Right.
A lot of people say Daiki because he's the world all-around champion, but actually, Zhang Baheng is... like, he doesn't have a weak event, and he broke 89 at the Asian Games.
Right, okay.
So for me, he's the front runner for gold in Paris if he is healthy. He's got some back problems, but if he does what he can do, for me, Daiki can't beat him.
Where do you think, given the European Championships, I was very impressed with Covton. Where do you think he fits in the hierarchy there going into Paris?
So he's a bit of a tough one because obviously he's very good. He didn't win a medal at European Championships in the all-around, but he's having some major injury problems. Like he's supposed to have surgery on his leg, but they're putting it off till after Paris.
Right, okay. He's
kind of been competing when he probably shouldn't be. So at his best, I would put him, like, say everyone does the best they can.
Yeah.
He's probably maxing out at like 5th.
Okay.
Because you've got like 2 Japanese guys, 2 Chinese guys, who are ahead of his scoring potential.
Okay. It's super interesting because you're obviously someone that follows all of the competitions and all the numbers and all of the stats. So sometimes I come in with just segments of a story, whereas you've got the whole piece of the puzzle, which is brilliant. That's why it's amazing to chat to someone like yourself. Okay, great. Let's move on to Kazuma Kaya. We spoke a little bit before we went live. You know, I certainly think he's a gymnast that's benefited from the selection process and being, you know, someone that can go and hit every single routine, and he's taken that spot where I don't necessarily think, for me personally, aesthetically, his gymnastics is my favorite, or that I think there are other gymnasts that can score much higher all around. But because they have that rigid selection process, he's taken that spot. Tell me a bit about his performance and I guess his consistency in the last decade. If you were there at the World Championships in 2015, that was his first world's medal right on pommel horse. So essentially for 10 years, he's been competing at the highest level and he's remained a consistent team member. Just talk to me a little bit about his performances.
Yeah, so he didn't have a single fall across all 4 days of competition. He had routines that like weren't his best, like particularly on floor and vault. Floor, he had like some difficult landings, like landing out of bounds. Vault, his vault is kind of sketchy to me. Sometimes he can do it reasonably well, but sometimes it's like not fully rotated and he has to like, there was one, I think on 2 of the days he like stepped straight off the mat and things like that.
Yeah.
So those were his biggest mistakes, but he's just so solid. And like we say, his execution is not the best. And he's aware of that as well. I think he's quite self-aware about it. But he has this nickname in Japan where he's like the man who can't fail.
Right.
Because he just doesn't fall.
Right, okay.
And I think the benefit of having him on a team is that no matter where you put him up, he's going to give you a solid score.
Yeah.
But also like it just goes to show like Shinosuke he counted 4 falls, Kazuma had none, and Shinosuke still beat him by over a point in the end.
Yeah.
And that's the difference in execution, I think.
Yeah. And then what role do you think he'll play in the team in Paris, Catherine? Do you think he'll be that first man up on a few apparatus if they're under pressure, maybe in the team final? It's a good routine to have up first on high bar.
Yeah, I think, so the events I would expect to see him do at a team final are pommel horse, rings, and parallel bars.
Mm-hmm.
I think with the team construction that they've got, sometimes they have put him up on other events.
Mm-hmm.
But with the team they've got, I don't think they need to use him on like high bar vault.
Yeah.
So yeah, I expect him to be first up on pommel horse. Rings is a bit more solid event generally, so maybe not. Then again, he is kind of he's not the highest score on rings, so he might be up first there as well. And parallel bars, they're all kind of around the same level, so I'm not sure what order they would go with.
Yeah. Brilliant. Okay, perfect. Let's move on then to I'm not going to say they're the 2 wild cards, but the 2 spots that weren't those all around like automatic spots.
Yeah.
So Sugino Takai, is that how you say his name?
It's Takaki.
Takaki. Okay, talk to me about him again. Been out of following the sport religiously for the last few years, watching his gymnastics. To me, he's a little bit of an anomaly. I mean, his physical frame, he's a taller gymnast but looks strong. He's good on pommels, high bar and vault, which is an odd combination. What was it like watching him? What's his physical presence like? And what does his gymnastics look like?
Yeah, so like you say, like all of the articles about him are like, oh yeah, he's really tall for a gymnast. Yeah, so he's an interesting one because he's been around for a long time. He's not the oldest on the team. He's the 3rd oldest on the team. He's older than Daiki by 3 years.
Okay.
He very nearly made the Olympic team in 2021. He was really close. Actually, that was horrible because it was like you basically watched him realize he wasn't making the team like on live TV.
Right.
So that was tough. And then similarly in 2022, again, he just needed to hit his last high bar routine and he didn't. So he's been really close. He's had a lot of opportunities. Last year was a bit of a rough year for him, but he's always been kind of in the position where if he hit his routines, he would be like one of the front runners for the team, but it's never quite come together.
Okay.
So he has competed internationally. He's gone to a few like World Challenge Cup events. He's got the hardest routine in the world on pommel horse, 6.9 difficulty. And I think He's got a 6.6 on high bar, which is 1/10 below Daiki. I think. I'm not sure if that means it's the second most difficult in the world. I'm not sure if anyone else has got 6.6 right now. I know at least one person has 6.5.
Yeah. Did Karimi do 6.6 at the Asian Games? Am I right? I think I saw that on your Twitter feed. I think he did a 6.6 on high bar and scored maybe a 15 or a 15-1. So maybe they're like similar. Yeah. So he's there. He's right up there. Yeah. He's right up there in terms of his difficulty.
His best high bar routine scored a 15 at, I think it was the All Japan finals.
Okay.
And yeah, his vault, it's not the most consistent. It's not like one of the best triple twists out there, but it's usable. Like, it gets the job done.
Yeah.
And especially like with Shinosuke and Kazuma on the automatic spots, you don't want to have to use either of them on vault.
Yeah.
So that like helped him out getting onto the team. But honestly, after All Japan Championships, I was like, he's making it.
Okay.
Because he was like, because I calculated after nationals what like the highest scores would be, like what the best teams would be just after that competition, and even counting a full on pommel horse on day one, he was on the highest scoring teams.
Right.
So it was like, as long as he hits one more pommel horse routine, like, because he was kind of a contender for an automatic spot as well.
Right.
He's really weak on rings, but like his other events kind of bring it up, so he is capable of breaking 86 as well. But yeah, he was kind of, as long as he hit his routines, he was always going to be in there because of what his strengths are and how strong he is on them.
Did he hit all of those? So his 4 pommel routines and 4 high bar routines, did he hit all of those?
So he fell on pommel horse on the very first day.
Okay.
And every other routine he did was 15.
So 7 out of 8, which is amazing for how difficult those 2 routines are, particularly on pommel horse and high bar, which are 2 events where, you know, arguably they're the 2 easiest events to make mistakes on when you're doing difficult gymnastics. So that's incredible that he's hit those routines. What do you think his potential is individually in Paris on those 2 events?
I think definitely if he hits his routines, he should make the pommel horse and high bar finals. Mm-hmm. The thing is, he's got all this difficulty. His execution isn't the best. It's not, he's cleaner than, say, like a Kazuma, but not as much as like Daiki or Shinosuke.
Yeah.
But he's definitely at the point where he will be pushing for the medals.
Yeah.
High bar's probably a better chance than pommel horse, I would say, just because pommel horse, you never really know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
He could be in there, he could not be.
Yeah.
High bar is probably his best chance of an individual medal, yeah.
Yeah, and I'd say probably that difference will be those specialists on those events, their execution will be very high, whereas I think his 6'9" pommel, he was scoring around 15-1, is that right?
Yeah, his highest is 15-1.
Yeah, so you've got like Reese, potentially Max, some of the other specialists that have qualified through those individual apparatus World Cups, their execution scores are so high that might be the difference. So he might be somebody that's maybe challenging for a bronze and in amongst it if he can get into those finals. Let's finish with the last member of the team, though. So Tanagawa, which I was amazed to read that he broke his kneecap in February. Is that correct?
Yeah.
How on earth has he got back?
He went to the Cairo World Cup in February. Made the floor final, then he withdrew from the floor final. So we knew he was injured, but it wasn't till after the first day of All Japan Championships where he came out and he said, yeah, I broke my knee.
Wow.
Yeah. And he was doing like full difficulty.
On a broken knee?
So I guess it's healed by now.
Right.
Because February to April was like, but to even get all that gymnastics back after presumably having to take time off. I mean, he does a handspring piked double front on vault. I had actually forgotten that he had been injured until like he did that vault, and I was like, oh yeah, that's not the best he can do it. Oh yeah, he was injured. Like that explains why he maybe doesn't look his best right now.
Yeah.
But he actually moved up. So obviously there was about a month between All Japan and NHK. And he was kind of in the position where it was like, if he improves a little bit, he's definitely going to make that team because of what we know he can do. Mm-hmm. And that gap, he upgraded his vault. to the pike dragulescu.
Yep.
Nailed it on day 2, and it was like, that's at that point he just needed to hit that vault, and he stuck it, and you could tell he knew because he like immediately started crying.
Right.
It was really nice.
Yeah.
Like everyone was cheering for him; they were so happy.
That does make me wonder, like, what on earth they've been doing to get him back fit for that competition. I remember being in 2015, being there in Japan, and being taken down to like they had like a spa area, and there was a jacuzzi that was like covered in tiny bubbles, and they were telling me it was carbon something, and it helps with recovery. And so I went in, and my body was just covered in tiny bubbles, like thousands of them. And I was like, what on earth is this? Like, I was like, these guys are doing things that I've never even heard of or seen anywhere else. So yeah, I'm amazed at how they've gotten back that fast. Similar with Dalaloyan, you know, recovering in time for Tokyo. Those nations that have the amount of resources they do to be sending stem cell treatment, whatever it is, it's pretty incredible. He got back and competed. You know, I've not really heard of many gymnasts breaking their kneecaps, so I don't know what that recovery looks like, but I can't imagine it's that easy, or it's not without, you know, a bit of a struggle or at least some pain. So that's incredible that he did that. And again, probably about a decade he's been competing now in that team. So it's amazing that he's done that. Do you think they're going to use him? What's his role in the team going to be? Is it going to be vault, potentially a ring score, maybe parallel bars? Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah, so he's their strongest rings guy on this team.
Okay.
For sure. Obviously, vault is like his main contribution. And also parallel bars, again, he's got the highest average out of the team. I think Shinosuke's like scoring potential is higher, like, but his routine's so difficult that he doesn't always get that kind of 15-2 score.
Okay.
But Wataru, like, usually you can count on him for like a high 14s. So yeah, those are the 3 events I'd expect to see him do.
Amazing.
And yeah.
And if you were gonna right now, let's say you're the coach of the Japanese team, Catherine, what's gonna be your free to count in team final on the 6 apparatus?
So floor, I would have Takaki, Shinosuke, Daiki.
Okay.
That one, Wataru can be quite good on floor, but obviously with his knee, he didn't do his best.
Mm-hmm.
If he's like looking better by the Olympics, we might use him instead.
Okay.
Not sure. Pommel horse, Kazuma, Daiki, Takaki. Rings, Kazuma, Shinosuke, Wataru. Vault, Takaki, Wataru, Daiki. Parallel bars, a couple, like, so for me, you don't want to use Daiki on parallel bars. He can score high, but you probably want to rest him as much as possible. So I would go, again, Kazuma, Shinosuke, Wataru.
Okay.
And then high bar, Shinosuke, Takaki, Daiki.
Amazing. So it'll be great to see how close that is and what happened. You never know in Olympic Games, right? Like what might happen, injuries, the qualification sometimes. Japan and China can be all over the place on that first day. So it'll be really interesting to see how that plays out. Let's just quickly look at a few standout performances that you have taken away from these competitions, Catherine. So what stood out for you? It can be an individual athlete, an individual routine, a particular skill. What were the standout things for you that just made you kind of look up and go, wow, that was incredible?
So for me, one of the highlights was that Tanaka Yusuke was, even just being there, still competing. He's 34 years old. He went to the Olympics in 2012 and 2016, you know, world Olympic champion. Originally, he was going to retire like several years ago. He had a shoulder surgery and now he's still going. He was very close to making the team. He was 4th all around at the NHK Cup. And his execution is just, it's outstanding. And it's like such an honor to be able to still watch him doing gymnastics. His parallel bars and high bar, parallel bars especially, it's just beautiful. It's like, that's how gymnastics should be done, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I wrote the same thing down. I just put Yusuke
Yeah,
Tanaka, beautiful gymnastics. I mean,
yeah,
aesthetically, it's just his pike forward position is just outrageous,
yeah,
and the fact that he uses that to his advantage, even on rings, doing that doing his skill on rings.
yeah,
For me, watching his gymnastics, it's always been that way. I always go back to that 2011 Worlds. He was beating Ochimura up until he got his concussion on floor when he did a 1.5 punch full
yeah,
twist and rollout. He was beating Ochimura from 3 events.
yeah,
And we'd seen him that summer at the Japan Cup when we had gone there to compete. And we're like, wow, this guy's unbelievable. Like his gymnastics is almost more beautiful than Kohei's in a way. It was smoother. It was, yeah, the edges were just a little rounder. So to see him at 34 doing that level of gymnastics and
yeah,
then to see how close he was, I was thinking after the first day, I was like, does he have a chance? I mean, what a story that would be. And because I knew that the selection process was very like rigid, I was like, wow, he really could do it potentially.
yeah,
But yeah, you're right, equally. And I do think he's got even better with age. I think, in his earlier parts of his career, probably fell victim to being quite inconsistent. But the fact that he's doing
yeah,
even harder gymnastics, particularly his high bar routine, is just incredible. And it shows you how, as a junior athlete up until the age of 18, if you had a real wide, expansive gymnastics vocabulary, you can adapt to any gymnastics code of points in any Olympic
yeah,
cycle. Because some of the gymnastics he's doing now, he was doing back in 2011. He was doing squat half Kovac back then. So for him to do squat half Coleman now, it's easy. He just adds, it's not that it's easy, I'm making that sound like it's
it
a war.
makes it look
But
easy.
he makes it look easy, and for him, it's easy to adapt because he's done so much different variety within his gymnastics. So for me, that was a massive takeaway from the clips that I saw.
Yeah.
And
Well,
I loved his rings routine. I thought it was beautiful watching his rings routine.
yeah.
When you see
Everything
someone,
he does is so clean. Like the other 4 events, his difficulty is lower, but he was nailing it.
yeah,
And Japan actually, they have an award that they give for like best execution across like the whole event, like both events, which he won by like 2 points. And then the person who was second was Tanida Masaharu, who's 19 years old. So you've got like the 34-year-old and the 19-year-old. And I mean, Masaharu, just beautiful gymnastics.
okay,
He's, I think, probably got the best form in the whole sport right now.
really well.
Like if you
Okay.
just look at like photos of him, like the leg extension, the toe point, it's just gorgeous. And this is his first year as a senior,
Yeah,
and he came 10th after the whole 4 days. He's one of the standouts for me. Like I just love watching him. And on vault, he does a handspring double twist. I always thought he was doing a CAS 1.5.
right.
And then I saw another video of it and I was like, hang on a second. Because that's a really unusual vault.
Yeah,
And like 2 times he just stuck it cold. Just like almost like reminiscent of Kohei's shoe
yeah,
felt.
yeah.
Almost like just gorgeous. Yeah.
Oh, amazing. Well, it's been amazing to chat to you. I think to finish off, Catherine, I can't leave this conversation without asking for your predictions for the Paris Games. So, we're 2 months out still. What would be your top 3 prediction for the team final? And then top 3 all around. I know we've spoke about that. And then if you could do while you're here, because our big audience will be fans that follow British gymnastics, what are your predictions for the men's British team? So let's go top 3 team final, top 3 all around, and then your prediction for the men's team and how they're going to perform in Paris.
Oh, that's hard. Because I've been looking at, because China's team isn't like finalized yet. And I've been looking at like Japan has like quite a big difficulty advantage, but China's scoring potential, I think, is actually higher.
Okay.
So I can't call it.
Let's go. Okay, and that, you don't need to go top 3 in an order. Let's go top 3, no order, in the team and the all-around, and then just your predictions for the British team.
Well, so I think team Japan and China top 2. I'm thinking USA 3rd.
Okay.
GB, I would expect to see 4th, I think. I think USA just have the edge at the moment.
Okay.
All around, Daiki and Zhang Bahong top 2, if they're both healthy. And then Shinosuke is my favourite for bronze.
Okay, amazing. And then the British team, obviously, you know, I was surprised to see Ukraine do so well and edge them out at the European Championships. I've said to a few people now, that Ukrainian team looks like a team of Avengers. All their body shapes are completely different. They've got like Radovilov, who's like big like this. Then they've got Vanayev, who's in his 30s, is losing his hair and is like super skinny. Then you've got like the new young gymnast that's a little taller and has got beautiful lines. So they're really like cool looking team. Yeah, what are your predictions? Do you think GB will beat Ukraine when it comes to the Olympic Games? And what are your predictions for the team and their performances?
Yeah, so I think the Ukrainian head coach just said, like, barring any injuries or anything, that European team is going to be the Olympic team.
Okay.
Like, it's not finalized or anything, but that's the idea. Whereas I think the GB team isn't going to be the same. And I think they had like some lineups that were maybe not what they'd ideally want to use. So I do think that, I mean, Ukraine had an amazing day, whereas I think GB can do a bit better.
Yeah.
So for me, GB is still ahead of Ukraine. I think for Ukraine, the goal is probably team final. Like, I know their goal is like a team medal, but I think making the team final would be a good result because they just sneaked in to even qualify a team for the Olympics.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And then in terms of like just individual performance, what you're expecting from Great Britain?
So obviously Jake is one of the front runners for vault gold. I mean, it's tough with like Artur Davtyan around because he just sticks everything. So it just kind of depends on the day, I think. And also you've got some other amazing vaulters in there. Max, obviously, on pommel horse is like in the conversation for gold. I think he's not as far ahead as he was like in the last couple of Olympics. It's going to be a bit tougher. But, you know, he's got one of the most difficult routines. If he does it cleanly, he'll be in for a medal for sure.
Yeah.
I think, I'm trying to think now, because I've just been thinking about Japan now.
Yeah,
I'm trying to like shift.
So obviously the team hasn't been announced yet. So we haven't officially got an announcement. So, you know, we're presuming there that Jake and Max are going to be in the team. And we obviously don't know about Max's injury at the moment on the extent of that. But presuming he's fit and healthy and he's in the team, the next three members of that team, who are you thinking at the moment that will be?
Harry, I think. I think kind of a lot of people like after Europeans wondering if he's going to make it or if Luke's going to make it. But I think Harry adds more like on multiple events. And obviously would be a contender for like floor and vault finals. Maybe even a medal on floor. James, I think he's too much of a team asset to leave him off. I know he's kind of in kind of a bubble position now with all these like great specialists and things. But for me, like you can put him up anywhere and he's going to give you a solid score. So
almost a Kazuma Kaya, but of the British team. Yeah.
And who have I said? Jake, Max, Harry. Oh, Joe, of course.
Yeah. Okay.
He had a tough games, but I think his performances at like English and British they showed that, you know, even post his injury, he's still like at a high level. And if he is, you know, healthy, if he's ready to go, then he has to be on that team.
And do you think that the coaches and the program are going to emphasize individual medals over team success? Which direction do you think they'll go? Or do you think they'll go, right, we'll go individual, and then if the team does really well, great, that's a bonus?
Yeah, so I've talked about this on Twitter before, because I know people are talking about this, saying like, if we think about individual medals, maybe we want to send Luke. But if you've got Jake and Harry already, and you think, oh, we want to send Luke because he's a medal contender on floor, you can't have three in a final. So for me, you can only have two of those three. Jake obviously is like the number one guy on that team. And as I said, I think Harry, he's like, I mean, he made 3 event finals at the last World Championships. So again, if he's healthy, I know he was having some problems. I feel like there isn't really a logical path to like emphasizing individual medals because all of the main medal prospects would already be on that team.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That makes
If
a
that
lot of
makes
sense.
sense.
I'd agree.
Yeah.
I'd say the same thing. Yeah, I think, look, it's an Olympic Games, right? And that pressure and that atmosphere does things. And so you never
Yeah.
know what the teams are going to do, you know, on that first day of qualification. And it really is a bit like we've spoke about today. That first day is the most important day. So it's
Yeah.
going to be exciting. Have you got tickets to Paris? Are you just going to be watching, you know, from home?
Yeah, I'm just gonna have to watch from home.
Yeah.
It's difficult with like going to Japan. Like
Yeah.
that was my priority.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And that's an expense, right? And going to the
Paris
Olympics.
is expensive.
Yeah,
But I went to the World Cup in Paris in 2022.
Yep.
So that's in the same arena. So that was really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, amazing. Yeah, I think me and Sam potentially might go for 2 or 3 days, be there, be around that Olympic atmosphere and do some podcasts with a couple of athletes, which will be super exciting. But yeah, Catherine, I've got to say thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for the work that you do. You know, as a gymnastics fan, there are not many places that I can go to, in particular to keep up with Japanese gymnastics, who I'm a massive fan of. So thank you for the work that you're doing. Keep doing it, please. You probably don't hear this very often, but there are a lot of people that follow all the work that you're doing, and a lot of those people are the athletes, the top level athletes. So yeah, hopefully if you don't hear that feedback very often, I can pass it on. It's amazing what you're doing. Please keep doing it. It's brilliant. People follow it, they read it, and it makes a big difference. So thank you very much. And yeah, all the best, and enjoy the gymnastics this summer.
Yeah, thank you. That's really appreciated. Nice to hear. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you.